Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about sliding bass lines, and we're going to do that at the end of this project over here. As you can see, this is the same drop from the last project, in which I explained the whole breakdown and whole drop of this, but it didn't really go into detail on the bass sound, because as I promised, I was going to make a different video on that, which is the video that I'm making today. So this is the bass line. I'm going to play the whole drop so that you get an idea of the context as well. So you can hear that this is a nice sliding bass line that is just gliding into a rolling bass line over here. And of course that is facilitated with all of the other sounds that we have on top of it. Just the kick and bass is going to sound like this. So having a look at the bass line, it actually is made out of two different parts. What I like to do is I like to have a main bass which is more mono-focused. And then have a very strong stereo layer on this kind of stuff. And what you'll find is that they're actually both the same preset. This is from my Psychedelic Essentials Volume 3 pack, where the main idea of this bass line revolves around the Iconist kick waveform, as you can see over here. But you can add extra grittiness, extra smearing, extra tonality into it with macros that sit over here. And the whole point of this bass line is that it's an automatically sliding bass line. So what that means is that the volume sidechaining is already controlled in the patch itself, as you can see over here with the LFO that is controlling all three of the oscillators that we use for this patch. And then in terms of the filtering, you can see that we have this very heavy notch over here, and then later on we have a low pass filter as well, which is controlled over here. And this is just adding extra movement, while this filter is mainly for control of the tone. You can see that with the mod wheel over here, you can actually control the position of that notch filter. And you can hear that it has a drastic impact on the tonality. Even though this notch mainly lives in the higher frequencies and we're filtering out a lot of those frequencies with the EQ afterwards, it still has an impact on the actual waveform because of the phase shift, and it also just encompasses the highest frequencies of our bassline as well. Now this is the main patch, so you can hear that it's actually having a very strong mono component, even though this bassline is designed to work with stereo as well. As you can see over here, we have the 6 voices of unison and the detune, so this is going to make some stereo information. We're turning that down a lot over here with the utility, to make sure that this is more of a mono component. And that means if we want to have that ultra wide, ultra big kind of sounding bassline, we need another component that is introducing the stereo field. So it's the same patch, I just duplicated it over, and as you can see, we have the same serum patch. We have a slight modification to the EQ over here, and then actually we have a utility that is also turning down the width. And the reason for that is I didn't really want the width from the original patch. I wanted to regenerate the width over here with M stereo spread, which is what we're doing over here. So this is the M stereo spread setup. This required a lot of experimentation with the bands and the focus, and you can see that I'm really spreading it out with the spread and the saturation over here. So the spread is already making it wider, and then the sides are also going to be saturated, making them even louder still. Of course, for a stereo bassline, we don't want any of the lower frequencies, so you can see that we're filtering those out, and I'm also filtering out around 1K because that was getting a little bit too harsh when I was playing the two of them combined. I wanted to, of course, have enough space left in the mix for all of the other things that I was doing. And even though this track isn't actually in the final mix yet, I'm going to still export it to Reaper and actually mix it there. I like to do these kind of things where I just give myself an idea of what the track is going to sound like in the mix by approaching it with like preliminary EQing and that kind of stuff. And then I'll tweak the more detailed kind of EQing later in the actual mix, where I have to really figure out how everything is going to fit together. So then there's this final M set over here. I was initially deciding on turning off the mono component entirely. But I like the pumping effect that we get with the mono components in there a little bit more. There are some issues with this layer still, mainly the fact that it seems to be panned to the right a little bit. But again, this is the kind of detail that I would probably fix in a mix. This is of course one of those things that you just check for when you're mixing a track. I've talked about the 4 levels of separation before, and this is what that references. You check the volume, you check the frequencies, you check the time, if there's no clashing in time, and then finally you check the stereo field. Of course, time-wise, that is something that mainly happens in the production when you're actually writing stuff. For example, this bassline isn't layered on top of this bassline, so they're separated in time. But when it comes to actual mixing in time, even the stuff like fixing up the bassline, if the bassline may be overlapping into the transient of the kick. So for example, over here, this is where the transient of the kick is. If the note, for whatever reason, maybe there's a little bit of phase shift, maybe there's some other processes in here that introduce a little bit of stuff. If that kind of thing happens, what I tend to do is I fix those things in a mix by maybe just implementing a little bit of sidechain that cuts off the bassline right before here. So in the production projects, that would look something like this. You'll of course do that at the end of the chain, and don't worry, we'll go through this chain as well. But you would do probably something like this. You can see where the intended sidechain is and where the stuff is that we really don't need. So we just cut out that part so that we have enough space for the transient of our kick drum. But that brings us onto the final chain, and this is on my whole bass group. This is where I do like final processing in terms of the saturation that I want to add. As you can see, I also have a final bit of stereo spread on here. We have an EQ here, which is for transitions. This is the one that I believe we use over here towards the end. The amp stereo spread looks somewhat like this. This is doing the stereo generation of both the rolling bassline as well as a little bit of extra from this bassline over here. We also have the black box over here for some extra saturation. Again, this is just the initial thing that I'm dialing in because this is the sound that I like. And then later on in the mixing stage, when I'm actually finalizing this track, I'll dial in everything that the sound needs to actually fit in the track. That is kind of how I separate the production stage and the mixing stage when it comes to adding effects. And that is also what is, for example, happening in this EQ over here. We then have our final filter rack over here, which you can see is doing high pass filtering and low pass filtering. I don't think that this is actually happening anywhere on this part itself. This is the high pass and this is the low pass. So you can see both of them are static in here. And then we have our final saturator, which is just set to soft clipping to make sure that it doesn't go over 0 dB anywhere. Now I do realize that I didn't really recreate the patches from scratch, and that's not really what this video is going to be about. As you can imagine, if I were to recreate those patches, I would just essentially give you a preset for free. And it's part of a pack, so that would be unfair to the people that actually bought it. But hopefully still, I explain it in a way that you can take away all of the key features of this particular patch and recreate it from scratch. And if you're actually interested in getting the exact patch that I'm using, then of course you can always purchase the preset pack, which is a great way to support the channel. Another great way to support the channel is to continue watching some of my videos. So there will be 2 up on the screen right now, including my last tutorial where we actually went over the whole drop and the breakdown in front of it. So hopefully you find that interesting and you enjoy watching that. But that's going to be it for today. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.